Papa Taylor asks, is there some maker sense that you've developed, like a skill or a technique that's totally gut feel or muscle memory for you now, that you find surprisingly tricky to actually explain or teach? One of them is randomness. Human beings are famously difficult at creating random numbers. When I say famously difficult, it is one of the ways in which they catch tax cheats in the past was because humans are bad at making up numbers. In your financial books, in your QuickBooks, are hundreds and hundreds of expenses, let's say, right, in your spreadsheet. And those expenses are in dollars with a decimal and then in cents, right? Now, if you start making up numbers and you're making up dollars and cents, you might think, I'm just going all over the place. This feels totally random and no one would ever guess this is right. But here's what I'll tell you. If you take actual accounts and you average out what the numbers of the last two digits will be, it's not a totally random distribution. Within American commerce, at least, there are numbers that show up more than other numbers, and they can take a look at a spreadsheet and look at the distribution of numbers just in the last two columns on the right side of the decimal and tell whether these numbers are real or they're plausibly made up. This is how bad people are at choosing random numbers. And also, it turns out computers are really terrible at random number generation because you always need an algorithm, and the algorithm is always going to give you the same result. So, they use pseudo-random number generators. Like, they base it off the time of your that your computer is at, or the light coming through the camera. Famously, a company here in San Francisco whose random number generator was a wall of lava lamps with a camera on them. And it was like, 24 lava lamps. It's a beautiful thing. And it's magnificently random. That is how to do it. So when you're weathering something and you're wondering, you start to, you're putting marks here and you're putting marks here and you're putting marks here and you're putting marks here. And the big mistake everyone makes in their early weathering is everything's too even. And you get nervous about doing stuff that's a big standout because it feels like, well, when would that happen? But if you go out in the world and you look at things like a brick chimney, you'll see it's not like made of 500 bricks that are all slightly weathered. It's like a bunch of bricks, and then there's going to be some huge black water stain over here, and then some other kind of like former paint stain. If you take pictures of the actual weathered randomness of the world, you'll see that we're all being way too conservative in our home painting. And that's not necessarily a maker sense as much as it is, every kind of spidey sense you have professionally comes from your institutional knowledge. So I understand axiomatically that I'm going to be bad at random. So when I paint, I do a pass and then I hold it at a distance and I'm like, yeah, this is way too even. And that's when I'll take like some chunk of dark and I'll just be like, and then I'll walk away. And then I'll come back and, okay, I see how that gels. And I'll kind of take out the edges there. And look, sometimes I'll come back to it and I'll do a little fuzzing and it'll instantly look like it's overly even again. But my institutional knowledge knows to throw some big color gestures at a weathering job because that's more real. Before Weta Workshop opened its amazing location-based entertainment in Auckland, New Zealand, we went down and covered some of the construction of it. And I got to paint, if you go see that exhibit, there are some slabs of hanging meat, and I helped paint those slabs of hanging meat. And the painters and I were in the paint room and we're adding paint and drips and stuff. And Richard Taylor comes in and he's like, it all looks too even. And he gets this like bucket of just the grossest, like poo green colored stuff and just hit it. It seemed shocking. And the moment he did it, it was like, oh, wow, you're so right. One of the amazing things about watching Richard Taylor move through Weta and look at things that people are building is not only is he an unbelievable manager of people, uh, but he is also aesthetically so in tune with the job that the hills he decides to die on are always the right ones, man. I mean, when he was telling us about the beautiful masks from Ghost in the Shell, and talking about how he had to work really hard to get that gig. He's in LA and he's moving and shaking with them and he's lowering his bid to get that gig. And then they have a very specific thing. And he's like, I think you need this kind of paint job on the cheeks. And he's so, so, so right. And it is rare that someone with a gift of such, Richard and Tanya's gifts of management are so prodigious. They have done so much incredible work that it is amazing that they are also aesthetic geniuses. Chris Pretzelbear Lewis says, this is a fine way to finish this live stream. It's very affirming to see your approach to creating, seeing your neurodivergence, no insult intended, no insult taken. Seeing your neurodivergence and how it reflects my own makes me feel great about how I approach my projects. This helps. We have to talk about all this stuff. I learned a valuable lesson from my wife. She's a marriage and family therapist, and she went through school a few years ago and came out of school with a small cohort of professional friends or friendly professionals that she meets with on a very regular basis. And they meet to go over how their business is going, how their practice is going, to consult with each other about difficult stuff that's going on. And they're basically talking shop. We gotta all talk shop. In the last few months, I've done a couple of just Friday beers here in the cave where I've just called up all the shops I know in San Francisco and been like, come on by for some beers. And you know, between 15 and 30 people have shown up the 2 times I've done it. But what I love most about it is just professionals talking shop. And there's such a wonderful grace to that, especially because we see ourselves reflected in each other's practice, and we all have different coping mechanisms, and they're all based on different traumas, and they all externalize in different ways, but there are also a ton of commonalities. And when we share those, and frankly, I think of, for me, the origin story of my consciousness shift on Tested is right after COVID lockdown, where I almost lost my left middle finger cleaning my lathe, and talked about that on camera here in the cave and talked about shame and those feelings we have that we don't like to admit to when we harm ourselves in our place of business. That's real. And I appreciate you saying that, because talking about that has been a great boon for my practice, for my life, and I love hearing other people's experiences as well. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I wanted to briefly mention that you could become a Tested member. I know everybody is competing for you to become a member of their thing. What I want to express to you is that the Tested membership has become such an important part of the Tested family. We get tremendous feedback from the Tested members, and they expand the stories that we can tell and the things that we have access to. And you can become a part of it right now by clicking on the link below. See you in the chat.